What up, it's Shinkster94, and welcome to my ultimate weapon showcase of Resident Evil REmake. Now, I have a lot to say before I actually begin going over weapons, and even though a majority of my closest followers don't seem to mind that, thanks to a recent poll I conducted, I know there are some impatient scrubs out there, or decent people with narrow attention spans, or just short on time. Now, this prologue turned out to be one of the longest I've ever done, so it's its own part. If you want to get straight to the weapons, please proceed to part 1 of the actual ultimate weapon showcase. So, first to talk about the game. Resident Evil REmake, as it sounds, is a complete rebuild of the first Resident Evil game. It maintains nearly all of the same basic mechanics, story elements, characters, and iconic locations as its OG counterpart, while being aesthetically more appealing and adding a decent amount of new content that enriches the series' lore. It was initially released exclusively on the Nintendo GameCube in 2002, just 6 years after the original game, and had since been re-released over subsequent generations of gaming. One of these re-releases was in 2015, when the game received a visual and graphical tune-up and was branded Resident Evil HD REmaster. This, of course, is the version of the game I will be playing for this weapon showcase, but more on that in a little bit. When it comes to the weapons of this game, all but 2 are brought back from the original in terms of their naming convention, and those are the 2 machine guns exclusive to the PC port of RE1. Once again, there are 2 main characters to play as, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, and most of the weapons can be wielded by both, while each has a couple exclusive weapons. Despite most of the weapons having the same names as the original, you'll come to notice that there are differences in the designs and the real-life firearms some weapons are based on. Being a new game, it also has some new weapons alongside the familiar ones, and introduces a new weapon-related mechanic known as defensive items. This allows escaping the clutches of certain enemies and avoiding moderate damage in exchange for using these items, and I will make sure to show each and every compatible enemy these can be used on. Returning now to the version of the game I'm playing for this showcase and how exactly it will be unmatched in graphical fidelity, securing its ultimate status in my second remaking era. So as I said earlier, I am playing the 2015 HD remaster of Resident Evil REmake, specifically on PC through Steam. Console ports of the game are unfortunately capped at 1080p at 30 frames per second, which was the quality of my now obsolete previous weapon review of this game. On PC, however, the in-game video settings allow up to a 16:10 resolution of 2560 by 1600 at a variable frame rate that caps at 120 frames per second, as you can see in my benchmark. That's right, 120 frames per second, and I am recording each and every one of those frames because even though YouTube unfortunately has yet to implement playback beyond 60 frames per second, the slow motion effects I like to add will be noticeably smoother, and in the event that YouTube does upgrade its playback capabilities, I could re-upload this video one day so you get the optimum experience. Back to resolution though, you may be asking how can I be playing at 4K if that resolution isn't even available? Well, it turns out that you can go beyond the game's threshold if you manually edit the config.ini document in the game's local files. Let me show you the game in windowed mode on my desktop so I can prove it. So right now, I have the game set to its maximum provided resolution, and the window doesn't fill the whole screen because I have a 4K monitor. Now here's the config file, and the file path for your reference. And as you can see, these reflect the exact same settings. Just for more context, let's change the resolution in-game to 1080p, the maximum 16:9 resolution, and naturally the window's even smaller now. Let's close the config file as well as the game. Then reopen the config file. You notice now it has the last resolution I set. Now for the fun part. Let's manually edit the resolution to 3840 by 2160, or 4K, which again isn't listed as a resolution in the game's settings. Let's also take the liberty to change the refresh rate to 120 Hz to match the frame rate of 120 frames per second, just to ensure seamless motion rate. Because the game only lists 59 and 60 Hz options, and it's always best to have matching refresh rate and frame rate. After saving and closing the document, let's reopen the game. Now the window fills nearly the entire screen, therefore displaying at native 4K resolution. So theoretically, if you had your computer connected to an 8K TV, you could probably change this to 7680 by 4320 for a native 8K resolution. I don't have an 8K output though, so I couldn't possibly test it myself. What's funny though is if I return to the settings in game, they do not match what we're seeing now, and any tweak to them here will revert the changes that I made. So, to summarize everything I just showed you, this weapon showcase will be the first on the channel recorded in 4K at 120 frames per second, which will transition nicely to the next point I want to make. Here's a crazy fact about my history with this game and its weapons. Let's flash back to 6 years ago when I made the last showcase of REmake's weapons and recall something that I said in its prologue.
This weapon review is essentially a remaster of my original weapon review for Resident Evil REmake, which is no longer on my main channel and has been moved to my TGS Classics channel, alongside an even more original video of this game's weapons. So this is literally the third time I'm showcasing these weapons, and hopefully the last, of course until the probably inevitable time when they release a 4K rendition of this game.
And here I am 6 years later to once again show you the weapons of this game for the 4th time, in the resolution I predicted would warrant my revisitation of this game, with the added bonus of a much higher frame rate. But wait, there's more! In connection to the main titles I've covered so far in this remaking era, I do have a couple graphical mods installed to further enhance the experience. Starting with a smaller one, I have a mod that retcons all of the characters' outfits to fit the series continuity better. Most of them are extremely subtle, but the most noticeable is the color of Jill's outfit. Normally, her blue outfit has a greenish tint to it, which doesn't match how she looks in FMV cutscenes nor any other appearance of her in this outfit, and this mod fixes that. The other mod is much more attributable to the overall quality of the game. This mod polishes up the pre-rendered backgrounds and some of the 3D elements of the game, including doors, character, and enemy models. For a while, there was a mod known as the REupscale project that remained the definitive upscaling mod for REmake, but earlier this year, a new mod emerged that's regarded as a spiritual successor known as RESCALE, which I happened to come across while I was typing the very script I'm reading out loud to you right now, and after recording quite a few clips for the showcase already, so you'll see the difference in some portions of the showcase. As usual, I'll provide links to these mods in this video's description. So now to finally go over my solidified formula for showcasing this game's weapons using snippets from the last time I reviewed them. Before anything starts, I'll first categorize the weapons more or less in order of firepower. If there's more than one weapon in a category, then they'll be shown in order of acquiring them in the game. Resident Evil REmake includes most of the same types of weapons as the original alongside the new defensive items. The order I overview them will be as follows: knives, defensive items, semi-automatic pistols, shotguns, magnums, miscellaneous, and finally explosive weaponry. I'll begin showcasing each weapon in the inventory and read its in-game description. If a firearm is the opener of a weapon class, I'll first inspect the ammunition it uses. Since this game is a remake, I will also compare the weapon to its OG counterpart to make out similarities and/or changes. If the specific gun has had any other appearances in the series prior to the current game, I'll mention each and every one. Afterwards, I'll provide an image of the weapon's real-life counterpart or inspirations if applicable. As a disclaimer for all of my weapon showcases, I get all of my IRL sources from the Internet Movie Firearms Database, which serves as an online weapon wiki for movies, TV, and video games whose pages can be edited by anyone with an account, which brings the likelihood of misinformation and absent details when stating the real-life versions of game weapons. People who immerse themselves in weaponry may feel elicited to point out those possible blunders, but once the video is online, nothing can be reasonably done beyond a comment and an edit to the video's description. Following the IRL mention, I'll show how to obtain the weapon, whether you start straight off with it, find it at a specific location on the map, and potential conditions to meet before it's available, or unlock it as an award for meeting certain criteria when completing the game. Then it'll be time to demonstrate the weapon in action. First, I'll show both characters with the weapon equipped and their idle stances. I prefer to use a well-lit, enemy-free environment with a close-up camera angle to get a detailed look at the weapon. This area for weapon inspection is what I like to call the hub, which I'll give a brief tour of at the end of this prologue. While testing the weapon out, I will add an optimized slow-mo effect to one or more of the shots fired, with explosives getting a reverse effect on top of the slow-mo. I'm really excited to show you guys how I'll implement the slow motion in this video, since it's the first in 120 frames per second. After unloading the weapon, I will perform the satisfying reload animation. Any weapon that both Chris and Jill can use, I will show with both, since there's always a small difference in aiming posture between sexes. If you've seen my ultimate weapon showcases of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, you'll remember that I also performed a quick shot trick with most of the weapons. This game only has that for maybe a couple weapons, but I will show it where I can. After all of that test firing, I will proceed into enemy territory to test the weapon's firepower. I will use the same exact set of enemies for all weapons in a particular class, such as zombies for melee and pistols. Then as the firepower increases, I'll use stronger enemies to match the pacing of the overall review. As always, the central focus of these showcases is to simply show you the weapons of the game and how they perform, not to determine the damage to enemy health point ratios or be overcorrective with firearm information and calibers. I swear, some people who watch my showcases probably sleep with their weapons in real life with how much they cry sometimes in the comments. But I digress. After reviewing the results of the enemy test and averaging the shot amount, I will declare the current weapon concluded and then share in-game cutscenes of the weapon being fired or its functionalities being used, such as a slide or hammer being pulled. This excludes simply holding the weapon, otherwise the cutscenes would take up too much time. The cutscenes will transition into the next weapon of the lineup, and the process begins anew. At the end of the showcase, where all weapons of the game have been covered, I'll add the number of them to the overall total weapon count of the series thus far, and then announce the subsequent game in the series to get the ultimate treatment. Now for a brief tour of the hub that I chose for this ultimate weapon showcase, which is not the same angle as I did in the last version of this game's weapons, nor for the original ultimate weapon showcase, and there's a reason for that. It turns out that angle is a little too low for my taste these days, especially when you're aiming weapons with Jill. When she aims down, the weapons get cut off. It also has ambience going on in the background of thunderclaps, and it's pretty distracting. So I found this new angle inside the Umbrella lab. This is the X-ray room. And as you can see, it's close up enough, and it has plenty of head and leg room so we don't cut the weapons off. And the lighting is acceptable. It could be better in some other areas, but there's too many caveats with other areas, such as being too close or ambience being a problem. So I'm gonna sacrifice just a tiny bit of lighting for all the other things to be good. Alrighty peeps, I really hope you enjoyed and absorbed all that info, and your patience is well appreciated. Let us delve comprehensively into the weaponry of the Resident Evil franchise's first remake. See you in the first part.